European Union leaders are presenting a united front today following the upheaval sparked by President Trump at Davos with his threats of taking over Greenland. Denmark's prime minister is in Greenland today discussing details of this framework of a future deal that Trump and the head of NATO spoke about in Switzerland. The president of the European Union, meantime, is stressing the importance of Europe becoming more united and more independent as Ukraine's president offers this blunt assessment of Europe's current standing on the global stage.
Europe looks lost, trying to convince the US president to change. But he will not change. President Trump loves who he is. And he says he loves Europe, but he will not listen to this kind of Europe.
I'm joined now by Panetta, who, of course, served as a Secretary of Defense and also Director of the CIA under President Obama. Mr. Secretary, always good to talk to you. I'm curious, based on what we just heard there from President Zelenskyy, what kind of Europe do you think Donald Trump would listen to?
Well, that's the question. And, it's hard not to look at the present situation and see over 80 years of foreign policy that Republicans and Democrats have joined together, that the United States and our allies have supported, is being turned on its head. For over 82 years, we worked together. We built alliances. We shared the same values. We stood up for the same principles, and it provided stability. And today, what we see is a lot of chaos, a lot of disruption, and a lot of instability. And I'm just not sure how this all turns out. The hope is that ultimately we can find a negotiated way to resolve these issues. But I'm afraid that the administration has this attitude that if they don't get their way, they're going to continue to basically threaten others with either tariffs or military action of some sort. I'm afraid we are in that kind of period right now, which is very unpredictable.
So in terms of that unpredictability, and also what you brought up, these threats of tariffs, which we know, I mean, in a lot of ways, the uncertainty stems back to the tariffs from President Trump, but also these threats of military action. A number of different efforts from the president have been linked back to ultimately national security for the United States. Do you see any of these actions on the part of President Trump making the United States more secure?
Well, if the president were willing to really work with others, we could develop a common approach to protecting our security. Right now, Greenland is willing to work with us to develop better security. Canada is willing to do that. Others are willing to do that. And so there is a way to be able to accomplish this without having to threaten, without having to bully, without having to be disruptive. But the real issue is whether the president wants to embrace that. I assume he would. The reality is others have to hang tough. China hung very tough on the trade issue, and frankly, they were successful. Europe was unified and hung together with regards to the issue of Greenland, and the president has backed off. So the main issue here is going to be whether or not the president continues to challenge these countries or whether he's willing to negotiate. If he wants to do what's in the interest of our national security, he will negotiate an approach, a common approach to better security.
Well, certainly interesting. You mentioned China. It's been fascinating to see, too, just the turn that we've seen from Canada in terms of moving far closer, as we know, to China in just the last week. I do just want to get your take on this point, which has come up today. So we have heard so much from President Trump over a number of years about NATO, as you know, but he is increasingly in the last several days questioning the commitment of NATO's allies to the United States, also claiming they, quote, stayed a little back from the front lines in Afghanistan, which we know is not entirely accurate. accurate. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer sharply criticized the president's, in his words, insulting and frankly appalling comments about NATO troops and their involvement in Afghanistan. He also suggested the U.S. president should apologize. What do you make of those comments from Keir Starmer and where we're at right now as the president in many ways is trying to rewrite the history of the NATO alliance?
Well, the president obviously either doesn't understand what happened with NATO or he is just deliberately trying to confuse the situation. I mean, history speaks for itself. I was Secretary of Defense during that period. I worked with NATO that was working with us in Afghanistan. We had a number of countries that were supporting our effort in Afghanistan. We have always believed that NATO and the NATO alliance were critical to our security. NATO responded to 9/11, for goodness sakes, and supported our national security. I think the president has to acknowledge that ultimately NATO has been critical to our security. And when he doesn't, when he criticizes it, when he uses terms that simply are just not true, what he's doing, frankly, is he's hurting his own credibility. That's what worries me in the end. All of this, ultimately, when the president threatens and then backs off time and time again, it hurts the credibility of the United States and, frankly, makes us look weaker.
Leon Panetta, always appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.